story walk. Where's this concept come from? Is it something you've done yourself?
I've been doing story walks around Wiltshire for years, actually. I guess there were probably people doing story walks long before me, and many, many hundreds and thousands of years ago, I would imagine people walked and told stories as well. I think my first one in Wiltshire was probably about 20 years ago. I did some story walks for the Wiltshire Wildlife Trust around some of their meadows and through some of their woodlands in Braden Forest, and had a great time. The concept is quite simple. I just gather everybody together at the start, pick up my box of storytelling artefacts, and off I go. We find a tree, I sit down, people sit down, I tell stories. I always come to these sorts of events with a list of stories in mind that I want to tell, but inevitably I find within a few minutes the whole plot has been abandoned. Somebody will say something which triggers a story, and I will be off telling different stories.
So is it quite on the spur of the moment, off the cuff kind of stories, if you plan ahead?
It's interesting. It's interesting because it's a bit of both, really. The stories are all in my head, and I've been telling them for years, and several of them that I tell over and over and over again have become my sort of signature stories, and they're ingrained, and I tell them in a certain way. Other stories I might read them once or twice, make a few notes, and then I tell them. And if the story works, then that might become one of my regular stories. So these are all stories from all over the world. Today I'll be starting with a story from Ireland, which just popped into my head as I was walking around earlier on, thinking about where I'd sit with people. It took me back to 25 years ago at the Link Centre. I went and saw a storyteller called Ben Haggerty, and he told this story. The story's called Monday, Tuesday, and it's a great story. And so for me, it takes me right back to my roots, because it's the first story I told. I was a primary school teacher here in Swindon at the time. I told it to my class. They liked it, and we took it from there. So I thought I'd start with that story today. I've got a couple of other favourite stories that I'd like to fit in during the walk. And as I say, I'll just take my cues from the audience and see what they like.
So you're not a native Swindonian. Are you from Essex, did you say?
I'm from Essex originally. I moved down to the West Country 33 years ago, I think. Moved to Swindon in 1985, moved to Swindon. Lived here for about 12 years. Both my daughters were born here. Taught here at Eldene Primary School. Met Matt and Andrea from Lower Shore Farm very early on in my time here. Was particularly attracted to what they were doing with Lower Shore Farm. And when Matt Holland kick-started the Swindon Literature Festival, which was probably in 93 or 94 or something, I took along a few children from my school, and we went to the Arts Centre in Old Town, and children told stories. And I'm very fond of Swindon. Still got family in Swindon. My mother-in-law and my stepdaughter live in Swindon, and we're back here regularly.
So you mentioned obviously you got involved early on with the Swindon Festival of Literature. What brings you back every year?
Well, I don't actually come back every year. That's the thing. I tend to. I'll go through phases, really, where I'll go to Lower Shore Farm a couple of times a year and help out as a volunteer, and then Matt might say to me, "Do you fancy doing some storytelling at the festival?" And I'll say, "Yes, that would be great." And then he comes up with an event for me and a venue. I always intend coming back for the dawn chorus, but I never seem to be able to get out of bed early enough to make it. I always admire those people, those stalwarts of the festival who come to the dawn chorus year after year.